There's certainly a lot of hype in the media. There's certainly a lot of media attention regarding cyber and the threats associated with it, and it can seem a bit overblown, but the numbers don't lie, and the numbers show that organizations are repeatedly being intruded into, and that attackers are going after and taking those organizations' sensitive information, such as intellectual property and monetary assets. And so while it's easy to get caught up in all the hype, organizations should remain focused on security as a business process. Security as it relates to mitigating risk, that is identifying the risks and threats that are most relevant to that particular organization, and then going about the business process of mitigating those risks through an organized security program. Our studies have shown that most organizations are in fact already compromised. In a study we did of over 1,200 organizations, we found that 97% of them had existing compromises at the moment we looked at those organizations. So quite stark, actually. Regarding the issue of building fences, so security has for a long time been focused solely on prevention. And while prevention is an absolutely good thing to be doing, we ought to be keeping out attackers as often as we can. In practice, what we've seen is that prevention often fails, and attackers are still getting in. In fact, as we found when we studied those 1,200 organizations, attackers got in, they were already persistent on the network 97% of the time. And because of that, we need to shift from a sole focus on prevention to a mix of prevention, but also detection and response. In other words, detecting that we've had an attacker intrude, and then containing and remediating that intrusion before too much damage to the organization can occur. Antivirus certainly has its place, although as you mentioned, the efficacy rate of antivirus is about 23% in detecting malicious code on a system. So certainly, when looking to mitigate the compromise of a system, antivirus does not appear to be enough on its own. So what we need is obviously some supplemental focus in order to help us mitigate the risk beyond that. And one of the reasons that antivirus efficacy rate is so low is because it focuses solely on signature-based detection. In other words, antivirus detects that which it knows about. Now, what we've found is that the attackers are most often modifying or changing their tools, such as their malicious code, and their techniques, because they know that antivirus is looking for known knowns. And so what we need to focus on is how do we detect those unknown unknowns, those things for which we don't have a signature. And that needs to be detected by analysis of what the actual pieces of code are doing. In other words, when we detonate them or when we run them, what do they do? Do they do something legitimate, or do they do something malicious? So hackers range widely. Obviously, at the lower end of the spectrum, you'll have what they call sometimes your script kiddies, or people who might be messing around or fooling around, trying to compromise perhaps for pride. But really what we're finding is in most of the breaches that have been reported in the media, as well as in many of the breaches that don't get reported in the media, what we're finding is that the attackers are fairly sophisticated. They could be a nation-state adversary, they could be a criminal group, they're very well funded, and also it's a who, not a what. We're not just talking about a piece of malicious code or a specific technique, we're talking about a group of people who are well funded and for whom it's their job to compromise organizations and take that information that those organizations hold dear. My advice to Treasury organizations would be to approach security as you would any other business process. Work with a partner to help you identify the risks and threats to your specific organization, and then work with that partner to go about enumerating goals and priorities related to those risks that can then be mitigated, can be addressed through a security program.